You know, it would be nice to be in the news for good reasons rather than bad reasons, but the reality is these days we are in the news, Essendon that is, mainly for bad reasons. So there's a couple of things I'd like to talk about in this video. The first is that Jay Clark was reporting today that Jordan Ridley has actually met with Brisbane. This is different to the news a week or so ago where Jordan Ridley requested a trade to Brisbane. Requesting a trade is not the same thing as actually meeting with the club. Jordan Ridley has apparently met with the Brisbane Lions. Essendon's trying to, block this and also Merrett's departure. And I've been simmering on this for, a day or two now, ever since the news of Ridley and Merrett has come out, and I'm actually starting to warm more to the idea of these players going. And you've got to remember that we don't get nothing for them. It's not like they go and we're not left with anything. We will get something good for them. And really, the cards are with us. We don't have to trade them. And we can say to these clubs and other clubs, well, what is it? What do you have? And I was thinking about how Essendon used to be when I was younger, and we were always considered a ruthless club. Rowan Connolly once wrote that Essendon, historically, when they've been a good side, has always tended to stand for at least one of skill, flair, and aggression. It's just one of the things that has been sort of culturally sort of passed down, that Essendon has always tended to stand for at least one of those things, at least when they're a good side, and when they're a really good side, often all those three things all at once: skill, flair, and aggression. And that's just kind of been synonymous with good Essendon sides. And I would add to that, especially in the Kevin Sheedy days, we were kind of ruthless as well. I remember the days when, even though I was really, really young at the time, my memory sort of goes back to about 83 if I'm pushed. But around that time, and even the year before, it was kind of when Roger Merrett was getting criticised for being a bit of a hitman. Robert Walls was criticising Merrett, but, Kevin Sheedy would stand up for him. And what we had, I guess you'd call it politely, some thugs, and I mean that in a good way, not a bad way. And we would stand by these players, whether they were doing the right or sometimes the wrong thing. And they were key components of premiership sides. Now, I'm not suggesting that you go around belting people necessarily, but we were ruthless. We tested the rules as they were at the time. And it's pretty telling, I think, that when you look at Zach Merrett in particular, the club he wants to go to is Hawthorn, who I think have a reputation and always have had for being ruthless and making tough decisions. And I even go back into more recent times. Now, Hawthorn, of course, won their last premiership in 2015 and then were kind of nowhere for a few years. But if you remember, in around 2023, they started the 2023 season horrifically, and they were favourite for the wooden spoon. They got rid of, at the time, Tom Mitchell and Jager O'Meara, and at the time they were key players for them and important players, and everybody was saying they've cut too far. They've been too ruthless. It's too big a change. And they started the season horribly. They couldn't win a game for the first few rounds of the season, and everybody was saying that they would only finish the season with 2 wins and they'd get the wooden spoon. They were favourites for the wooden spoon officially. I remember it. Early 2023. We beat them in the first round of the season by about 10 goals that year. They actually recovered towards the end of the season to win a total of 8 games. All right, nothing special, but that's a hell of a lot better than the 2 wins or 3 wins that the people saying that they were going to win the wooden spoon said that they would win. And then 1 year later, that being last year, 2024, they came pretty close to winning the premiership. All right, they were actually probably the best team in it when you look at their form at the end of the year, even though they finished outside the top 4, because they made ruthless decisions. And you can take the view that Sam Mitchell shouldn't be meeting with opposition captains. He's met with 2 of them, of course, Oscar Allen and Zach Merrett. But the reality is that's the ruthless approach they're taking. At the end of the day, no one's going to care 5 or 6 or 7 years from now if Hawthorn achieves success that back 6 or 7 years earlier he talked to the opposition captain. Sometimes that's just what you need to do. Life isn't always nice. It's not always fair. And to the victor go the spoils. And you all hear the saying, nice guys finish last. That's true. It's not really a good thing. I wish it was true that nice guys could come first, but that's not how it works. That's just the reality of the world we live in. Sometimes you need to do things that are, I wouldn't say bending the rules, but you might do things that might on the surface appear, morally questionable, but at the end of the day, if you want success, sometimes you need to push the boundaries, and being ruthless like they are is the way to go about it. The thing about the Merrett Ridley thing, there's a couple of ways you can look at it. You could argue it's kind of a ruthless thing to do, if you were to look at it that way, to hold them to their contract. They want to go, you hold the line, you say, no, you're not going, you're going to be held to your contract, you're two of our best players, you are going to stay no matter what. But it actually would be probably more courageous, and I think that's probably the word, it's probably more courageous than ruthless. It would probably be more courageous to let those players go and really almost accentuate a rebuild. It's already started anyway. You're close to ground zero. Why not be at ground zero? You're so close to it, doesn't really matter. And really just make a courageous decision, something that perhaps Hawthorn would have made had they been in that situation. Hawthorn have always had strong captains, and part of the hallmark of being a strong captain is being a loyal leader, which obviously Merrett in this particular case has not been. So you can make a strong, courageous decision, and you know what? It might not actually be as bad as what people think, because if those two players go, all right, it doesn't necessarily mean that Essendon's on-field performances would fall as much as you might think. And let me explain why. I always compare the NBA, the National Basketball Association in America, to the AFL on a couple of issues, because they're, in some respects, polar opposites. And what do I mean by that? Well, the NBA, if you get a really good player, they're 1 out of 5. All right? When Shaquille O'Neal leaves the Orlando Magic and goes to the LA Lakers, they become a contender immediately, because you're the best player in a sport that only has 5 players on the court. One player matters. It's very, very important. And if you lose a player, you immediately fall out of contention if you lose a good player through injury, right? No sport in the world has a bigger disproportionate impact with one player than basketball. Aussie rules is the opposite of that. Aussie rules, there are 18 players on the ground. Every other sport's got less. Rugby league's got 13. Rugby union's got 15. Soccer's got 11. You think of gridiron, where a quarterback can have a hugely disproportionate impact on the game. You lose a good quarterback, that can be the end of your team. And on and on and on. Aussie rules, we've got 18 on the field. One player, despite what we think, is never as important as what we think they are. They're just not. It doesn't mean they're not important. I'm not saying that. But one player is never as important as what we think they are. And if you look at Essendon's 13-game losing streak towards the end of the year, what was the game that was our best performance of that 13-game losing streak? Well, it was probably the St Kilda game, okay? And I think most of you would probably agree with that. If it wasn't our best performance, it was our second best performance of the losing games towards the end of the year. We nearly won that game and perhaps should have won it. We played really well, and if it wasn't for a Mason Redman miss right at the end of the game, we win that match. And guess what? Zach Merrett didn't play in that game. And I was just looking at our potential midfield without Zach Merrett, what it would look like. And without him, and of course injuries can happen, I know that. But if you have a look at our midfield without Zach Merrett, you've got Sam Durham, Darcy Parish, who at his best was All-Australian. Whether he can get back to that level, obviously we don't know, but just go with me here. You've got Sam Durham, Darcy Parish, Nick Martin, Jai Caldwell, and Andrew McGrath, who I think would, in that situation, become captain and would play in the midfield. That's not a bad midfield. I'm not saying it's the best in the AFL or anything. It's not. But they are all really good players. And I think McGrath is actually a better midfielder than he would be, than he is a backman. And I think if Merrett did leave, McGrath would be a very good captain. I stated this in my previous video. I think Andrew McGrath is very popular amongst his teammates. And he is a leader as well. He's the vice captain. He is considered a leader. And the younger players love him. He's got a very encouraging style, right? He doesn't rant and rave. There is a place for ranting and raving, but he's not that type of person. And his teammates, the younger ones, really look up to him. And I've heard that the younger players look up to him more than they look up to Zach Merrett. And that's the thing about captaincy as well. Your captain doesn't have to be your best player. Why is it assumed that just because Zach Merrett is the team's best player, which he is, that he's also a natural leader and the obvious choice for captain. Well, he's not. I mean, that would be sort of kind of coincidental that your leadership and your physical abilities are both aligned. Well, just because he's the best player doesn't mean he's the best choice for captain. And, I don't think he's a fantastic captain. I think he's a fantastic player. Everything we see about him shows that he's a reasonable captain. But do I think he's the best captain in the game? I don't necessarily think he's the best captain in the game at all. And I think he's probably been made captain because he's the team's best player, which is understandable, but it's not always right. So I think this type of decision, a courageous decision by Essendon, might actually be the best decision in the long term, right? We are not, right, a one-man team, despite what everyone says. I know that's the narrative and some of you might disagree, but we are not a one-man team. Essendon is not Zach Merrett, and we are also not Jordan Ridley, okay? There is a lot more to the Essendon Football Club than that. And as we showed in the St Kilda game, we are more than capable of being competitive. In fact, we were more competitive in that game than the games where Zach Merrett actually played. The other thing I'd sort of like to mention in regards to Merrett is this so-called chase for success. Success, and I did mention this in the previous video, but I just want to expand on it a bit, is not an entitlement. It's never been an entitlement. And success does not define how successful your playing career is, because if it did, then Tony Lockett would be regarded as a failure. Gary Ablett, Senior, would be regarded as a failure. They never played in premiership sides. Now, of course, the ultimate success is team success. We all know that. But as a player, you don't get to determine that. That's the point. The only thing that determines whether you win a premiership is how good your teammates are. If you get drafted to a good team and you happen to be at a good team, you can't determine that. It's got nothing to do with you in a way. All you can do is prepare and physically make your body the best it can be and play to the best of your ability and do the best you can. That's all you can do, right? Joining a successful club because you're sick of being, having failure at one club, it's a bit like running a marathon and getting to the 39-kilometre mark, and then someone else just runs in for the last kilometre and crosses the finish line before you and gets the glory, but they haven't actually put in the effort of running the previous 39 kilometres. I mean, if you just join a successful club and win a premiership, well, anyone can demand that. Any one of the 800 players in the AFL could say, I want to be at Geelong, and I demand a trade to Geelong. Well, if you do that and you get the trade and it happens and you get to go to Geelong, you probably get to play in a premiership at some point. But it's nothing to do with you. It's because you're at the best club with the best team. You're just riding on their coattails, which is what Zach Merrett would be doing if he went to Hawthorn. He wouldn't be winning a premiership because of him. He would just be riding on the coattails of what he thinks is a successful club, a bit like just running in for the last kilometre of a marathon. As Tony Lockett showed and Gary Ablett Senior showed, all right, you can have, I know Lockett changed teams and things like that, but he still didn't win a premiership. You are not defined by the team that you play for. You don't get to determine that. What you do get to determine is how well you play yourself. And Zach Merrett has shown he's a professional, he's had a great career. Whether he wins a premiership or not, he will be remembered as having a great career because he's a great player. All right? You don't have to go around chasing success at clubs that you think you might be able to get that at because because you feel entitled to that success, as if it's some sort of thing that's owed to you. It's not owed to you. That's why I like Dyson Heppell so much. He stayed at the club, and his career is not, it's not a black mark on his career that he didn't play in a premiership. That's not his fault. Dyson Heppell did everything he could have done at Essendon to be as successful as he could have been. It's not his fault that Essendon wasn't much good when he was there. But he did everything he could, and he's looked upon fondly, not just by Essendon, but by all fans, AFL fans of all clubs, as a person of genuine integrity and a really good person. So I don't think this chasing of a premiership at this more successful club, I just don't think it's a good look. It's not an entitlement, and it's not something that is owed to you. And I think this is a really good opportunity for Essendon, now that I've had the opportunity to stew on it a little bit over a couple of days, to really accentuate this and push these players out in the same way that Hawthorn did with a couple of players a few years ago, and everyone thought they were going to come last, and they didn't. And really go forward with a group of new players who, like I said, are pretty good. It's not like our midfield is not that good. It is pretty good when you look at it without injuries. So I'm going to leave it there. I want to know what you guys think of all this. Essendon's been in the news a lot for the wrong reasons, but it's not all doom and gloom. There is always light at the end of the tunnel, and sometimes it's darkest just before the dawn. I hope you guys enjoy this video. I'm going to leave it there, and as always, go Bombers.